By August 1945, the United States Navy was the most powerful maritime force the world had ever seen. It was a colossal industrial achievement, a fleet born from the fires of Pearl Harbor and forged in the shipyards of a nation unified by total war. From the mighty Essex-class aircraft carriers and sleek Fletcher-class destroyers down to the humble, ubiquitous Liberty ships, this navy had spanned the globe and crushed the Axis powers. But with the sudden, thunderous end of the war brought by atomic fire, this unparalleled armada faced an immediate and paradoxical crisis. It had become obsolete overnight. Thousands of ships, from brand new vessels to battle-scarred veterans, were suddenly without a war to fight. They were too expensive to maintain, strategically redundant, and technologically outpaced by the dawning jet and nuclear age. The United States was left with a victorious fleet. It no longer needed a ghost armada waiting for its final orders. This is the story of what happened to that fleet. The greatest dispersal of naval might in human history, a story of rust, reckoning, and ruins lost to the deep. The solution was as vast as the problem itself, the Mothball Fleet. In quiet, sheltered waters across the United States, most famously in Suisun Bay, California, the James River, Virginia, and Puget Sound, Washington. The Navy began assembling its ghost armada. The process was methodical and precise. Ships were stripped of ammunition and sensitive equipment, their engines pickled in preservative oil, their hulls coated in protective red lead paint that would become the fleet's signature color. Dehumidifiers ran constantly inside sealed compartments to ward off corrosion. They were called the Mothball Fleet or the Ghost Fleet, and at its peak, it contained over 2,000 vessels. From a distance, it was a breathtaking, almost surreal sight. A forest of gray masts and silent guns, stretching for miles, a monument to a war that was already receding into history. These ships were not being scrapped. They were being put to sleep, held in reserve for a future war that everyone prayed would never come. To understand the scale of the lost fleet, one must first understand the Liberty ship. They were not glamorous warships, but the true backbone of Allied victory. The freighters and tankers that carried the fuel, food, ammunition, and tanks across the Atlantic and Pacific. Built using prefabricated welded techniques that allowed them to be constructed in a matter of weeks, over 2,700 Liberty ships were launched from American shipyards. They were dubbed Ugly Ducklings, but they were the workhorses that outfought the U-boat wolf packs. After the war, hundreds of these vessels, many barely used, found themselves in the Mothball Fleet. But their simple design and vast numbers made them economically unviable to maintain. Their fate was the most dramatic of all. They became a bridge of ships to nowhere, their holds empty, their decks silent, waiting for a call that would never come. For some vessels, the end of the war was merely the prelude to a more spectacular and tragic demise. In the summer of 1946, the U.S. government launched Operation Crossroads at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The goal, to test the effect of atomic bombs on a naval fleet. A target fleet of 95 ships was assembled, including captured Japanese and German warships like the Nagato and iconic American vessels like the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga and the battleship USS Nevada, which had survived Pearl Harbor and D-Day. The first test, Able, was an airburst. The second, Baker, was an underwater detonation that created one of the most iconic and terrifying images of the nuclear age, a massive vertical column of water and radioactive spray with ships tossed like toys. While some ships sank immediately, others, like the USS Independence, were so hopelessly contaminated they were later scuttled in deep water. Crossroads created the first fleet of ghost ships, not through neglect, but through atomic fire, their wreckages forming a radioactive graveyard on the Pacific floor. For the majority of the mothballed fleet, the end was not a dramatic explosion, but the slow, methodical work of the scrapper's torch. As the Cold War solidified and new naval technologies emerged, the preserved ships of WWII became increasingly obsolete. The government began a massive sell-off program, auctioning vessels for pennies on the dollar to private scrapping companies up and down the American coasts. Places like Terminal Island in California and Baltimore Harbor became massive ship-breaking yards. The process was monumental. Workers, often using little more than acetylene torches and sledgehammers, would systematically dismantle the giants of the war. A battleship that took years and millions of dollars to build could be reduced to a pile of scrap steel in a matter of months. It was a necessary industrial-scale recycling, but it was also the physical unbuilding of an era, the literal dismantling of the tools that had won a world war. By the 1960s and 70s, a new, more purposeful fate emerged for some of the Ghost Fleet. Conservationists and state governments realized that these obsolete hulls could be given a second life as artificial reefs. The process was deliberate and complex. A ship would be meticulously cleaned of pollutants, towed to a designated site, and then sent to the bottom with controlled explosions. On the seafloor, the ship's structure instantly became a new substrate for marine life. Coral polyps attached themselves to the steel, fish swarmed the newly created habitats, and the wrecks became hotspots for biodiversity and sport fishing. The aircraft carrier USS Oriskany, for instance, was sunk off the coast of Florida in 2006, becoming the largest artificial reef in the world. This program transformed instruments of destruction into cathedrals of life, a poignant and fitting afterlife for the lost fleet. Another fate for the old warriors was to serve as targets for the new. Throughout the Cold War, decommissioned WWII ships were used in live fire exercises SINKEX to test new weapon systems and train new generations of sailors. Destroyers, cruisers, and even the mighty battleship USS Alabama, before she was saved as a museum, were towed to remote ranges and pummeled by missiles, bombs, and naval gunfire from modern warships. It was a brutal, yet practical end. These ships, designed to withstand the weaponry of their day, were torn apart by the terrifying power of harpoon missiles and laser-guided bombs. They served their country one last time by helping ensure the lethality of the fleet that succeeded them. Their final resting places are often known coordinates, but they lie in pieces, shattered and broken on the seabed, their forms utterly unrecognizable from the proud vessels they once were. Today, the vast mothball fleets are a fraction of their former size, but haunting remnants persist. In Suisun Bay, for decades, a ghost fleet of WWII vessels slowly rusted away, their red lead paint flaking into the water, creating an environmental concern. A massive, multi-year effort has since cleared most of these ships, towing them away for recycling. But a few iconic locations still hold echoes of the past. The Reserve Fleet in the James River and the inactive ships facility in Bremerton, Washington, still host a handful of veterans, though now from the Korean and Cold War eras. Seeing these places is like stepping into a time capsule. A silent, still harbor where the ghosts of maritime history sleep their long, final sleep. A tangible link to the scale of the lost fleet. So, where are the 1,500 vanished ships? They are not lost in the sense of the Bermuda Triangle, but lost to public memory and scattered across the globe. Their locations are a mosaic of naval history. Some lie unknown, designated wreck sites as artificial reefs. Others rest in the deep water ship graveyards off the coasts, where they were scuttled after being deemed unseaworthy. The wrecks of Operation Crossroads are meticulously charted, though too radioactive to visit. The ships sunk as targets lie in military exercise areas, and the thousands that were scrapped exist only as re-rolled steel, perhaps in the skeletons of skyscrapers and the bodies of cars. Modern maritime archaeologists, using sonar and ROVs, continue to locate and identify these wrecks, piecing together the final chapters of these vessels and preserving their stories before they rust away completely. The story of the lost fleet is more than a tale of industrial disposal. It is a profound epilogue to World War II. It represents the immense, almost unfathomable industrial output of the United States. A nation that could build an armada to conquer empires and then, just as methodically, take it apart. These ships were witnesses to history, from the convoys of the North Atlantic to the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific. Their fates. As atomic test subjects, as artificial reefs, as scrap metal, reflect the changing priorities, technologies, and environmental consciousness of the nation they served. They are a haunting reminder of the transience of power and the relentless passage of time. The lost fleet has vanished from the surface, but its legacy endures, not just in rust and wreckage, but in the very fabric of the post-war world it helped to create.